So today in the shop, our R1 has, after 14 years of service, 35,000 miles, is due for oil and filter. I just have not had any issues with the bike except having replaced the starter. 35,000 miles, it has been bulletproof, and I have video on my channel for replacing the starter. It is a big job. It took me several days to do it, but I did it with the manual. But today should be relatively easy, oil and filter. Now I always put down one of these old rubber mats because I always seem to wind up dripping something on the floor, and the garage has rugs, of course. The K&N 204 is the proper filter for an R1, and we use Yamaha lube. That's what's recommended in the factory manual, and 35,000 miles later, that's a winning combination. I try to clean the oil pan pretty good before I do anything, and I'll explain why when we do the test for the oil later in the day. Pulling off the lower fairings, a bunch of the little fittings, Yamaha has made that real easy to do, kind of self-explanatory, and it's a good idea if you don't know how to do this to just be careful. There's a lot of little tabs on, and they have to be taken, in this case they get slid forward and slid back. It's a little tricky to get them on and off. Once you do it once, you'll figure it out. It's kind of self-explanatory. Intuitive, I think they say. The drain plug is right out in the open once you pull the side fairings off. And conveniently enough, the same wrench fits the drain plug as fits the oil filter. That makes that one less tool you need to do the job. Draining out the oil once it's hot, the engine's hot. I let it warm up until it gets to full operating temperature. And right at this point in time, good time to go take a coffee break and let every drop drain off. Make sure the Zeus fasteners don't wind up somewhere that you can't find them later. There's a bunch of them. And rock the back and forth, gets out about an extra shot glass of oil. And it just takes, this is kind of a patience thing. While I have it apart, I take some, the polish, any kind of polish, clean up those lower fairings. They do take a beating. And there's the nut. The one wrench, you take the drain plug out, it'll fit the filter. In this case, an R1 is a very unique thing. There's only one way that filter comes out. And if you have to use a filter wrench, it is really, really cumbersome. Now, getting the pipes on an R1 are like spaghetti because it's a cross plane. They crisscross and go around each other. But eventually you can get the oil filter down. Of course, some of the oil drips onto the pipes. It's nice to let it cool down just a little bit before you get to this point. Before you go and try to take the filter out through the hot pipes. It's got to come out on the other side. And there's only one way, and boy, is it tricky getting it in and out of there. The first time you do it, you'll say, oh, I hope I don't have to take the headers off to get this out. But it does come out. It does take a little time. Now, the new filter, there's a little plastic. I always like to put one drop of oil on it just to be safe, and wiggling it back in there. And this gets tricky. Make sure the drain plug is back in, the oil filter's in and tight before we go to the next step. And this, I want to wipe off a lot of that oil, because once you start the bike, even one drop of oil will smoke for 10 minutes. It's a constant nuisance. Now, I'm out in the bright sun and I'm looking for little sparkles in the oil. With a clean screwdriver, I want to see the oil look perfect. Now, anytime you don't have an engine issue, that oil will be like that oil is, and crystal clear. I always use Yamaha lube. I don't try to save money on oil, and I don't try to invent something and use oil they don't call for in the manual. There's the little slots that the side fairings go back in. And again, it can be tricky. You've got to put the tab through the slot, slide it back or forward. I forget which way it goes. And then get one of these fittings in, it snaps, it locks, and now the rest of them are a piece of cake once you get them in. It's handy to have a little flashlight to, as I'm doing this, to when you can't see underneath the motorcycle like this, because of course we're in a dark garage. And they're off a couple of fluorescent lights, but it's not like a NASCAR garage, that's for sure. Now, getting the two of them buttoned together in the front, that can be a little tricky. The wheel is in the way. Sometimes you have to use a different length Allen wrench. But once you get the fairings buttoned up like this, I think from this point on it's pretty easy. But like everything in the world of motorcycles, there are some do's and some don'ts. Now, the one don't for sure that I would always recommend people not do is rush this through. Some people like to just take 3.5 quarts of oil and pour it in and hope that the window, the glass window shows right in the middle. Yeah, and if you do that and it's too much oil, what happens is then you've got to drain some out. Or you're going to live with 4,000 miles or 3,000 of the clutch not going into gear, banging and clanking and everything. So the drain plug is in, the filter is in, torque to factory specs, and I'm going to put in what I think this usually will be good to go. But the one thing I don't want to have is to have to go drain some of that oil out or suck it out like you do with a boat. So I'm real careful. I put in just about 3 quarts to start with. If you look at the side of Yamalube, it marks the quantity. Now, a lot of people measure the oil that comes out, and that gets sloppy, and put it back in and measure it, and then put that amount of oil in. I don't do any of that. I have this old school way of doing it, back and forth, just until I can see it come up on a window when the bike is level. And it's a lot of back and forth, but this kind of guarantees you're not going to get too much oil in the engine. And I want to have, and it's a nominal amount. I want to see the oil in that window before I start the engine. And it'll still take about another 1/2 quart. There it is. We got just enough. Now I can start the engine. And usually that'll tell me, because right now you're measuring the oil and none of it is in the filter. So once the engine is on, you let it run for 10-15 seconds. And if this, on some bikes like on a GS, the oil light will come on. Now I can real carefully from this point on add a little bit at a time, until I'm right in the middle of that window. And that's where I want to be. And when there's not enough oil, of course, that's the worst of all scenarios. But and I have done it. I put in, and I've too much, and I've had to take some out, and I was not happy about it. So I'm willing to spend a little more time, just little by little, and each time rock the bike, because it's got to be straight up and down and on a level surface. You can't do this on a hill or on a driveway that slopes up or down. And double checking it in every possible way. Get it right to the point. I like it right to the point where it's absolutely right in the middle. Then I can take the bike out into the driveway, start it and let it run, and I've wiped off any drops of oil I can get at, but there'll always be a couple of drops on the exhaust pipes. There's just no way around it. And I like to let it run out here for a couple minutes. One final little thing, when you run the bike after you do an oil change, of course, I like to run it for a couple of minutes. Number one, I don't want to see anything dripping and drooling, and I'll check that with the flashlight. Number two, you always get a little bit of oil on the exhaust pipes, no matter how careful you are, even if you wipe them off, and it'll smoke a little bit. No reason for concern. It'll go away in a minute or two. And I always want to make sure I check all the fairing, the Zeus, the fasteners are tight. That can be a real issue if you've forgotten one or some other thing. And with that in mind, I consider this oil change complete, and we are ready for some more fun miles on the R1. So I hope there was some useful information on this video. If you're doing any sport bike, especially an R1, or especially this is the 2009, the tricks, the things to pick up off the video, how to get that oil filter out, you've got to snake it around, and it's a good idea to just let the engine cool a little bit before you do that. And getting the oil to be in the middle of the window. Now, once it's above that, you get that thing where it goes into gear and it clunks and everything if it's not right in the middle. And it's supposed to be not a good thing for some of the engine seals when you fill up the crankcase with too much oil. That's what I've heard anyway. It must work well because this bike has 35,000 miles now, and every one of them has been fun. I maintain these bikes to the best of my ability. And when you do that, my good friend Ray Straub has a great saying. He says, you'll never wear the bike out. And I think he's true. Good maintenance, and they say there's nothing more important to do on a motorcycle than oil and filter. every 3,000 to 4,000 miles. I'm religious about it. I log everything in, and in the end, bike's 14 years old. To me, it's a brand new bike. When I come out to the garage, I think of it as a new bike. So again, I hope there was some useful information. That's what our channel is for. And whether you ride a sport bike or whatever, touring bike, you still have to do oil changes. And it's a good idea to be religious about them. So if you're new to our channel and you made it this far, there's probably a good chance that somewhere down the road you'll want to watch other videos. Now, a lot of these videos cover basic maintenance like we did today. A lot of them cover rides that we've gone on or work we've done on our shop or new tools. We just reviewed an air pump, a portable air pump. We try to share the information, and we also have question and answer videos from time to time. So if you have a question, please send it in appropriately in an email to fzrguy72618 at Gmail, and I'll try to answer it or answer it on the video that we do, the question and answer videos. Now, these basic things like oil changes, the thing that always impresses me when you're new to motorcycling, they seem very intimidating. But if you have a friend that'll help you, or you have some good videos, and I've used YouTube videos for years of trying to pick up good information, quality information, and thank you to everybody that sends in information. And little things like the Zeus fasteners and little things like that there's a drop of oil on the exhaust pipe, and when you start the bike, don't think it's on fire. Or another thing, while you have the bike apart, clean those parts or polish out the scratches. Audit the K&N filters. Have that nice, very handy. In this case, it's not handy. It's almost mandatory. But anyway, it's very awkward the first time you do any of these things. So I would always suggest if you're doing this kind of a thing, it's always a great idea, in my opinion anyway. It's a great idea to look at how other people have done it, and they've sent out videos and contributed them. I think it's just wonderful that we have YouTube, that we can share this kind of information so conveniently. It really is a convenience to me. And checking the oil, I do that just the same way you would do if you had an airplane. You check for little filings in the oil. Anything that sparkles in that oil, by the way, is not your friend. That oil was pretty clean. Any of the things like getting the fairings on, the little tricky slides and tabs and tangs, if you know they're coming, it seems a little bit easier to deal with. You might be wondering where these photographs come from. The new ZV-1 camera takes a picture every time it takes a video, so it allows me to look back and see if there's anything I've missed or anything I wanted to add to the presentation. The idea of this being that if you have a typical sport bike and you have never changed the oil before, this would be a good thing to watch. And maybe if you have a friend that's doing it, suggest that he do the same thing. There's a couple of tricks and a couple of do's and don'ts, and I heard all kind of stories about people that somewhere down the road the oil filter came off, or they didn't torque the drain plug down, or in my case I safety wire up the oil filters too, just as a extra precaution, just from racing days. And I always want to go on a clean driveway, run the bike, and see if there's any oil beside maybe what dripped out off the bottom of the exhaust pipes. And I'm hoping that this information is useful and usable and at least not terrible to watch, and that there's some tip on here, something here that'll either save you money, time, or both. And thanks so much for watching.